Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week, I wanted to continue going over some of the great comments that have come into the channel over recent weeks. In particular, this week, I wanted to concentrate on feedback on episodes 275 and 276 concerning the Summer Days and Summer Nights album. One thing I didn't go into too much in discussing that album is alternate and unreleased recordings. Joel Goldenberg mentioned the gorgeous backing track for Sandy She Needs Me, aka Sandy, aka Sherry She Needs Me, which Brian co-wrote with Russ Titleman. The backing track was put together on March 29, 1965 at the first session for the album. It'll go unfinished. Brian returned to it in August 1976, adding a lead vocal, and that went unreleased until the Made in California set in 2013, which released the 1965 track with the 1976 vocal. In 1978, Mike recorded a version of the tune as Trisha for his unreleased First Love album. It seems like kind of an odd choice for him to have picked a Wilson Titleman composition for his own album. Brian re-recorded the song for Imagination in 1998 with new lyrics by Carol Bayer Sager and the title, She Says That She Needs Me. I agree with Joel that the backing track is gorgeous, and I'm really surprised they didn't finish it in 1965. It would have made a nice addition to the album. Speaking of later reworkings, Michael the Movie Addict reminded me that Brian remade Summer Means New Love in collaboration with Scott Bennett with lyrics as Somewhere Quiet on No Peer Pressure in 2015. It's a beautiful track from an excellent album. I did mention the alternate version of Let Him Run Wild from the Today Summer Days 2 for CD set released in 1990 and Brian's re-recording of it for Imagination in 1998. The Today Summer Days 2 for CD also includes the first release of another track recorded during the Summer Days and Summer Nights sessions, a studio version of the Four Freshmen's Graduation Day. The session was far less harmonious than the song. Brian started getting upset at the number of takes the vocals were requiring, and the group ended up in a heated argument. Eventually, engineer Chuck Britz walked out, saying he'd be back in 10 minutes, which is heard at the beginning of the released version. Eventually, Mike began to question why they were bothering to record it at all. The studio version features a group vocal with simple guitar accompaniment. It's enjoyable, but it doesn't take what Mike called Brian's dog ears to hear why Brian was frustrated with the vocals. Most of the group, particularly Mike on the low vocal, sound a little sluggish and detached. By contrast, Brian's falsetto is great. Just based on the vocals, you get the idea that Brian was the only one really excited to be singing it. Researching this, I thought Mike asked a good question as to why they were bothering to record it at all. After all, they'd already released a version that had been a highlight of the Beach Boys concert album. The song's subject matter certainly fit in with the more directly teenage theme of the album, but it seems a little square for a 1965 rock and roll album, and definitely an odd choice for them to revisit. There's a session excerpt on Made in California that gives a little more of an idea of the difficulty the group was having with it. Crucially in that excerpt, I noticed that someone, it sounds like Bruce, mentions that they need to consider how it's going to sound on a television speaker. The session took place on May 5, 1965, when the group were just about to head east for another tour. As discussed in episode 263, U.S. Pop Culture 1965 Part 4, that tour was meant to include an appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show on May 16th. Brian reportedly went to New York to rehearse with the group, only to be told at the last minute that the show was running long and the Beach Boys appearance would have to be rescheduled. Reportedly, the songs they prepared for Ed Sullivan were Help Me Rhonda and Graduation Day. Based on that, I'm guessing that the session on May 5th was either to rehearse the song or to create a safety track that could be mimed to on television. With the group going back on the road, it would have been just about the last opportunity to work with Brian ahead of the appearance on May 16th. The choice of Graduation Day would have made more sense for an all-ages show like Ed Sullivan, showcasing their vocals on a more serious song that would have presumably appealed to older viewers as well as the kids. I think the studio version of Graduation Day probably has everything to do with the scuttled Ed Sullivan appearance and was never meant for summer days and summer nights or any official release. If anyone knows definitively, please pass it along. I touched on the session excerpt from the 2001 Hawthorne, California collection, which Bruce introduces as "You're So Sleepy," and is corrected by Brian that it's called "Wish That He Could Stay." In the end, of course, it became "And Your Dream Comes True." Betamax Blocker reminded me of the early version of Amusement Parks USA released on Made in California in 2013, which has different lyrics and also mentions New York's Coney Island, which isn't in the final version. Usual Mike TV mentioned that the only park in the final version that he was familiar with was Disneyland. Mike is in Australia, but that was true for me too. Part of it, I'm sure, is the fact that by the time I first heard the song, most of those parks were gone. I think, though, that even back in the day, most listeners would have known Disneyland and maybe one of the other parks if they happened to live within 100 or so miles of it. Amusement parks were largely regional attractions. And if it was difficult for Americans and English-speaking listeners to figure out what parks the Beach Boys were singing about, it was really tough if you lived outside the U.S. and English wasn't your first language. I mentioned that Amusement Parks USA had been a hit single in Japan. It came with an English language lyric sheet, and you can see the struggle to decipher the regional names. Palisades and Salisbury Parks becomes Palace Gates Submarine Parks. At Euclid Beach on the Flying Turns becomes And You Could Beach on the Flying Turns. Riverview Park and Disneyland come out okay. POP becomes Keo Key, and Jersey's Steel Pier becomes Jersey's Stero Pier, which makes a better rhyme for crazy mirrors. And finally, At First You'll Be a Chicken at the Jackhammer Ride becomes At First You'll Be a Chicken after jerkin' a ride. Of course, I grew up with English, and I've misheard lyrics worse than that over the years, so I think under the circumstances, the translator did a pretty good job. And the single went to number 3 in Japan, so obviously the feeling came across even if the finer points of the lyrics didn't. Anyway, I think that about covers all the official, unreleased, and alternate versions from Summer Days and Summer Nights. Between today and Summer Days and Summer Nights, I bet there's enough of interest for a really good 1965 Sessions box set one of these days, and I hope we'll get it. Our friend Lamont South sent me some really interesting info and photos on the Lagoon Amusement Park, which we know from the second verse of Salt Lake City. There's a park near the city, yeah, all the kids dig the lagoon now. It's full of all kinds of girls and rides, and we'll be flying there soon now. Of course, it was a favorite venue for the group beginning in their very early days. Lamont's research found 10 visits and 17 shows at the Lagoon between 1963 and 1970. He sent me this clipping from the local Deseret News about 2 upcoming shows on Saturday, May 29, 1965, with Dick and Dee Dee. The article names the members of the group and gives a very cursory description of how they got started. It also mentions that they hold the attendance record at the Lagoon, which Lamont tells me was 5,600. The live music venue within the Lagoon where the Beach Boys played was called the Patio Gardens. Lamont sent me a picture of this postcard from the 60s showing the Patio Gardens entrance facing east. The Lagoon and the Patio Gardens are still there today, and he also sent me these more recent photos. He tells me that when there was a show, the entire east and part of the south side were opened up, and that you could look in and see the stage and hear the concert all over the park. Even if you weren't attending the concert, it seems like it must have been magical to be there on a warm summer night with the rides and the lights, hearing the Beach Boys playing live and catching a glimpse of them inside the Patio Gardens. Of course, there were other notable acts that played the Patio Gardens in the 60s. On July 19, 1967, you could have caught The Who opening for Herman's Hermits. The Blues Magoos were also on the bill. You can definitely see that it was not a very big stage, just a small elliptical space, and Lamont tells me that 2 people operated the stage curtains by hand. On July 20th, 1968, Janis Joplin appeared with Big Brother and the Holding Company with support from Blue Cheer. The Jimi Hendrix Experience appeared there on August 30th, 1968. Lamont also sent me a very cool clipping from a Salt Lake City newspaper from February 1967. The The column is called Disc and Dat and answers a question posed by 13-year-old Lamont himself. In the article titled What's with Beach Boys, columnist Brian Gray tells us, Mont South, a teenager from Mallet, Idaho, wants to know why the Beach Boys haven't made an album or a single record since last November. Well, one thing for sure, it isn't because of declining popularity. Their last single, Good Vibrations, was the #1 song in England and in the United States. Herb Helt, the man with Capitol Records in this area, says their new album, entitled Smile, was to be released late last year. But Brian Wilson is not yet satisfied with the songs, and the album won't be released until Brian gives his okay. Watch for the Smile album to come out, though, probably next month. The LP will contain Good Vibrations to rack up sales. A single record will probably be coined from it and released along with the LP. And then it reads, Note, Carl Wilson's trouble with his draft status doesn't have anything to do with the Beach Boys record drought. Carl has told Capitol officials, I'll take care of it myself. Lamont says he remembers screaming at the top of his lungs when he opened the paper and saw that they'd used his question, and his mother wondering what the fuss was all about. I'm sure in February 1967, Lamont could never have imagined the long road ahead to finally hear the music of Smile. That article is so cool in showing that in February '67, fans were wondering where the new album was, and the fact that you actually wrote the letter is fantastic. Thanks for that, Lamont, and thanks for sending me the information on the Lagoon. The stuff that you come up with never ceases to amaze me. Getting back to Summer Days and Summer Nights, in part 2, I talked about how I thought California Girls would have made a great album opener. Shapilier 793 opined that there might have been concern about opening the album with a mid-tempo number. It's a good point. It's also worth remembering that when the album was released, California Girls hadn't yet been released as a single, so it had no proven popularity. Now that he mentions it, I can imagine there might have been concerns too that the song's opening might have come off as too strange or too highbrow. I still think it would have made a great opener, but I can see the logic of them starting with something more immediate and direct like Girl from New York City. Thanks for that, Shapilier, and I hope that I am at least in the ballpark with my pronunciation of your screen name. Also in Summer Days and Summer Nights Part 2, regarding speculation that the la 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 tongue singing in the chorus of You're So Good to Me inspired the tit 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 backing in the middle 8 of the Beatles' Girl from Rubber Soul, Skit Central found a quote that appeared in John Cruth's This Bird Has Flown, The Enduring Beauty of Rubber Soul 50 Years On. Regarding Girl, Paul McCartney says, The Beach Boys had a song out where they'd done La La La, and we loved the innocence of that, and wanted to copy it, but not use the same phrase. We talked about the similarity between the Beatles' Ticket to Ride and the Beach Boys' Girl Don't Tell Me. It's nice to have first-hand confirmation of Girl as another example of the influence between the groups running both ways. Thanks for passing that along, Skit. A lot of commenters wondered what Murray Wilson must have thought of I'm Bugged at My Old Man the first time he heard it. I'd love to know that, too. Robert Zastro mentioned the off-key singing as fitting the irritation Brian is expressing in the song's lyrics, and I agree. I'm sure it was also meant to play up the comic mood. Robert's comments also made me wonder if maybe the vocal was designed, either consciously or not, to get under Murray's skin. With his love of beautiful vocals, I imagine Brian's singing on it must have annoyed him, even if he never paid any attention to the lyrics. Last week, I put out a request for anyone who had seen one of Al Jardine's recent shows to let me know how it was. Camarillo Brio obliged with an excellent, nuanced, and detailed review of Al's July 4th show at Mystic Lake Casino in comments on episode 281. It's written from the perspective of someone who clearly really knows the Beach Boys, and I found it incredibly informative. It also makes me really want to see one of Al's shows. If you missed the review in last week's comments, you'll want to check it out. And thanks, Camarillo, for the excellent info and perspective. Going all the way back to episode 33, the Beach Boys Cafe Part 1, I recently heard from Brian of TriStar Construction, who was the builder of the Beach Boys Cafe in Hermosa Beach, which opened in 1992. He sent me a link to a video of the construction, which you can find on YouTube. I've also put the link in the description for this episode. Brian also tells me that he got to go to the Beach Boys warehouse in Van Nuys to get memorabilia to display at the cafe. Now there's a job I would have loved. As you might remember, our friend John Savala sent me this very cool Beach Boys Cafe matchbox and a Beach Boys Cafe menu, which are two of the coolest items in my collection. I was living in Los Angeles at the time the cafe was in business. Somehow I never heard of it, so I completely missed out. I'd have loved to have seen it, and I still think Al Jardine's macadamia mahi-mahi sounds pretty tasty. Maybe it's on my mind because I'm recording this right before lunch, but I thought before I wrapped up, I would share with you another Beach Boys food and drink related collectible that I recently picked up. It started with an ad in the back of the recent Endless Summer Quarterly that took me to Mike Love's website. In addition to concert dates, news, and the usual Beach Boys merchandise, there's a page for Club Kokomo spirits. You can order rum online. There's also a Club Kokomo merch page. Along with the expected shirts and hats, I came across a Club Kokomo tumbler set. I thought it was kind of unusual, and I'm not much of a drinker, so there was no point for me ordering rum. I figured the shirts and hats weren't that interesting and would wear out anyway, but I thought the tumblers were kind of cool. So here's what I got. They come as a pair, and you can see the Club Kokomo Spirits logo on both sides. I put some soda in this one, thinking it would make it easier to see the logo. There you go. Kind of a cool collectible, something a little arcane and different, kind of a good conversation piece. So I'm thinking that because there have been so many great and interesting comments coming in, next week we'll do one more cool stuff episode. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for that. Meanwhile, I look forward to your comments. Please hit like if you don't mind, subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Cheers.